I'd like to call the Cuyahoga County Finance and Budgeting Committee meeting for Monday, October 4th, 2021 to order, and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
As a reminder to all in attendance, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the county YouTube page. Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Jones,
Here.
Mr. Gallagher,
Here.
Mr. Schrein. Mr. Schrein is absent at the moment. Ms. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Baker,
Here.
there's a quorum.
Thank you very much. Item number 3 is public comment. Has anybody signed in for public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Mr. Will Tarter.
Good afternoon, Will.
Good afternoon, Mr.
Welcome
Chairman.
to the committee.
Thank you very much. To Chairman Miller and members of the Finance Committee, thank you for having me today. First, before I get into my prepared remarks, wearing my mask is a reminder for people to register to vote. Today is the voter registration deadline, so I just want to encourage people to register to vote and update their registration if they haven't done so. Okay, so good afternoon, Chairman Miller, members of the Finance Committee. My name is Will Tarter. I'm a resident of Broadview Heights, Ohio, in District 6. I'm speaking today as a private citizen and not representative of my employer. I am looking forward to today's presentation, especially with the recent announcements about proposals for funding several county capital projects. I have a couple of clarifying questions that I would like to see addressed during today's meeting, if possible. The first question is, from looking at the graph on page 25 of the 2020 results of operation, the county debt would be approximately $1.1 billion in 2023. If the county were to issue bonds, say $200 million for Progressive Field and say $500 million for the proposed Justice Center, what would be the estimated total amount of outstanding debt, principal, and interest? And question 2, what would be the estimated annual debt service? Finally, what amount of the debt service would be drawn from the general fund? Seeing that the sales tax is over 50% of the revenue to the general fund, I would be interested in understanding what the annual repayment amount would be from the general fund. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide this public comment, and I look forward to the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to take a moment at this time to bring to mind the untimely passing of Judge Joe Russo and ask everyone for a moment of silence. Thank you very much, everybody. And the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the August 2nd, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a
Second, Brown.
Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Baker and seconded by Ms. Brown to approve the minutes from August 2nd. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. There are no legislative matters referred to the committee. We have 2 discussion items. The first item is a presentation by our county financial consultant, Robert Franz, on county debt, bonding capacity, and options for funding major projects. Thank you very much for being willing to join us and present today. Please proceed. Yeah. Is the button on?
There we go. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure with the mask and everything, I'm doing everything right. But thank you for the opportunity, council members, to to present today. And Councilman Miller, thank you. I'd also like to thank you for the flexibility from prior scheduled meetings with some issues that I had with some family emergencies. So I appreciate the flexibility. Briefly, Bob Franz, Managing Director at Stiefel Public Finance. And I have been involved with various projects at the county for over a decade, so in various capacities, and currently I'm the financial advisor to the county. So have some background here for the county's financial and debt profile. There we go. When we talk about debt and we talk about the ability versus the affordability of debt, and that's the key phrase here, is affordability versus ability. What we're going to talk about today is the ability to issue debt. Affordability, as the county has demonstrated very successfully in the past, is when we put together all the detailed financing plans on an individual project basis. So it truly is a project by project specific analysis in determining affordability. Affordability and ability to issue debt are two distinct different things, and I just want to make sure that's clear as we talk through this. Also, when talking about the affordability and how the county has operated in the past, bond rating agencies view that very favorably. They score a lot of different aspects when rating the county debt. Management is one, and they view the county's management style as a very important strength because we have been able to prove affordability with very detailed financing plans and been able to follow those pretty closely. So I just want to make sure that that's a nice notch on our belt, because they are clearly an independent credit rating agency. It's their opinion of us, of the county, so it's important when putting these things together. And just on the page there, the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, the Hilton, and the Global Center Convention Center, just a couple of examples that we've done in the past when putting these financing plans together. The current profile of the county, we have a little over $1.06 billion in outstanding obligations, and it's very prudent. It's as I just said, and on previous pages, it's very project by project specific. So with the sales tax sunsetting in 2027, the Global Center debt, a decent amount of the hotel debt falls off in conjunction with that. So again, very prudent, and as you can see, it really falls from about $105 million down to about $60 million in 2029. So it's a nice rapid decrease. Again, that's something else that the rating agencies really view favorably, is rapid pay down within 10 years. We're basically half of our debt, bonded debt, falls off in the next 6 to 7 years there. So right at about $505 million. So again, a nice illustration here of the county's debt profile.
So can you explain to us why 2022 through 2027 is so much higher than 2021?
2021 is, I'm sorry, the 22 and 20 through, basically through 44 there, that includes principal and interest for the full year. 21 in 2021, this is as of September 1st. So we've made a decent amount of interest payments and some principal payments already in 21. So it's kind of a half year look in 2021.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
I'm not as familiar, perhaps as many, because I wasn't here at the time that some of this took place. So when does the Medical Mart, now Global Center, when does that drop off as being paid?
At the end of 2027.
It's okay. So, and when would the Medical Mart have dropped off if we did nothing after that? say the Medical Mart was successful and we didn't have to make any more investments, when would that Medical Mart have been paid? Do we know that, or
Well,
a
the
5-year, 15-year, what was that?
well, it was when we issued the debt in 2010. It had a final maturity of 2027 to match up
Right.
with the tax, and it's still the same. Whether I think I'm answering the question, but I'm not
I guess
sure.
the question is, did every penny of that 20 years for the Medical Mart pay the Medical Mart, or was a portion of that being used to pay for the Medical Mart? I thought that the Medical Mart was paid for well before the 2027 deadline of the tax dropping off, or am I mistaken?
The final maturity of the bonds that were issued is 2027 to match up with the tax that was set in place in 2007.
Okay, and then the Global Center that was then continued without really raising taxes, right? It was still within the same,
The Global Center / Convention Center is one issue.
all right, I'll listen to more and chime in. Thank you. Trying to pay.
Council President?
Thank you. Rob, as I see it's color-coded, can you tell me how much of this $1 billion, 66 million, is revenue-driven? Is that the best word to use? In other words, the money that has been bonded out is being repaid by revenue? Are they all revenue-based, or is some of this debt non-revenue-based?
And when you're talking, Council President, when you're talking about revenue-based, you're talking about revenues outside of the county?
Let me just use simple English. I imagine this building was probably one of those things that, did we bond this out? Do we know, Councilman Miller?
Yes.
This building was bonded out. I wouldn't consider this something that generated the revenue, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This building was paid for, but my question is, when we bond out, we expect to be able to pay it back. The source of payment for each one of these projects is 100% of this $1 billion have a dedicated revenue source to repay all of it.
I would say I'd have to get back to you on that, and I'm happy to do that. There's some older general obligation bonds, for example, are paid for through the bond retirement fund. So, which is funded by part of the inside millage. So it's a little bit confusing there. So there's some of those. I would say the Hilton, a number of the sales tax bonds, a couple of the GO bonds, and even a couple of the other deals have very specific financing plans for repayment sources. So we can get into that at another time, and I can give you that information as well.
So let me put it this way. One, I am not an expert in this world, so my questions are for you to educate me, and not that I know everything that there is to know. I'll share with you my experience, and correct me if I'm thinking about this incorrectly. I have my own debt, but I see it two ways. I borrow money for a limousine, but I know I'm going to rent it out, and then people are going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
I might borrow money to go on a vacation. If I go on a vacation, I've got to pay for that in another way. So I got to balance how much vacation borrowing I do and how much I borrow out to pay for a revenue-generating limousine. That makes sense? And I keep track of that so that I know I haven't spent more than I should or borrowed more than, or to use your term, what was the term? My ability versus my affordability.
Mm-hmm.
I can afford it if it's limos. If I got to buy 10 limos and that's what's necessary, it's all right. But if I go on 10 vacations, I better think about it. You see?
Understood. Yeah. I understand your question.
Does that apply to what we're talking about here?
It does. And what I would say is way I would look at that would be an external versus an internal repayment analysis, and I will provide that.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. Okay, there's a lot of words here. I'm definitely not going to read these word for word, but it's just additional background on how debt limitations in Ohio are treated. As you might imagine, debt limitations for counties are different than debt limitations for cities versus school districts versus libraries, et cetera. Resources are different. Ohio statute governing those entities are different. Mandates, responsibilities are all different. So there's no single source aside from the Ohio Revised Code. And in that, there's even more complexity. So there are different ways that the statute is applied, as well as there's different types of bonds and obligations that are used for different types of projects, depending on the details of the project. So it really is an individual project by project analysis and review to determine the best and appropriate way to fund those projects. Down here, general obligation bonds, sales tax revenue bonds, economic development revenue bonds are the three, I would say, more frequent types of debt that the county has issued, and some information there on how those limitations are calculated. General obligation bonds, you have voted and unvoted. It's very statute specific. And more so towards the unvoted debt, there's two different debt limitations within that debt limitation, the more restrictive being the indirect debt limitation. So that is basically the statute's way of saying without a vote of the people, there can be no taxes burdened on a single piece of property that is over 10 mils for debt retirement. It's more of a theoretical test, but it's more of a restrictive test compared to the direct, because there's a lot of exemptions that can apply in the direct. There's no exemptions on the indirect. Sales tax revenue is really calculated essentially on sales taxes collected versus debt service. And economic development non-tax revenue bonds, similarly, it's general fund non-tax revenues that are collected versus debt service that's already outstanding or will be outstanding immediately after the issue. So those are more self-imposed tests, restricting the limitation on those based on the market's reaction to the county's debt issues in the past. And then on this page here, this is an update, and a lot of this is an update from the February presentation. We updated this to reflect the current situation today. At the end of the day, we're looking at approximately $1 billion to $1.5 billion of capacity of additional bonding capacity from the GO and the sales tax bonds. Economic development, about $700 to $840 million, and certificates of participation, lease revenue, and other. That's more of a project by project basis. There's really no limitation on those from the statute perspective. That's more of an affordability to pay, bond rating impact, financial resource impact. So at the end of the day, what this is meant to show here is an updated review of, can we afford projects? And I think bare minimum, we're looking at $1 billion to $1.5 billion of capacity today, and more flexibility in the future as well, with different structures if the situations arise to kind of investigate those. So there's a lot of flexibility today and going forward for the county.
So looking at this additional capacity column, you add those up and it comes to $2 billion or more depending on the interest rate. So I presume that that although each one could do up to those amounts, you couldn't do all three of them at the same time?
A lot of it depends on the project, very specifically. And, a good example of that is the Hilton Hotel. That was done a very particular way with what are called certificates of participation. Under that structure, which is a common structure in Ohio, for school districts, cities, and counties, there really is no debt limitation to those. So that's one example. Economic development revenue bonds secured by the non-tax revenue security. Those bonds are issued under Chapter 165. So it kind of depends on the project and why we're issuing the debt and how that applies to the different credits here.
And what you're saying is just because we have this much legal capacity doesn't mean it's affordable in terms of the amount of additional debt service that it would require and the impact that might have on providing general operational services.
Councilman Miller, that's precisely it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
I'm going to reframe my earlier question. I had a little time to think about the best way to ask. I think this is it. So back in 2007, when I use loosely, the 0.25% was raised from sales tax over 20 years, drop off in 2027. How much income was raised by that 0.25% over 20 years?
Well, I don't have the precise numbers in front of me as what has been raised to date so far. When the financing was structured, we, in 2010, we did not anticipate growth at all. So at that point, it was prudent to do so because leading up to that time, sales tax really hadn't grown that much as opposed to the last decade where it's experienced significant growth, which has allowed for other projects to be done, like the hotel. But I can get back to you, and once I get back to the office and talk with budget and fiscal to figure out how much has been generated and how much has been paid out from that.
And I guess a follow-up to that is, if we're talking about extending the 0.25%, then, and we're talking about perhaps using that to fund a jail, that could be $500 or $600 million, how much of that 0.25 is needed based on history to afford that? Is it 5 years, depending on how quickly we want to pay it? 10 years? Is it, we would need the whole 20 years? What, based on history, which we'd have to look at the last 20 years, how much did we collect in order to project to know what 0.25 actually does for us?
Yeah, and I think that just depends on the perspective of how much we generated over the past 14 years,
Okay.
and where we think that's going, and what we think we need versus what is being generated and other needs as well.
Right. That is the question.
Mm-hmm.
If I can get that back. But I would like to have if we're talking about a 20-year extension, even if you're only going back 14, we should know what the other 10 or 13 years was also, even though it's a smaller increment. And then what are we projecting, given our best outlook? What would 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, what does it take to support the conversation of the jail if we were to extend that 0.25% tax and maybe a 1% tax or 1.5% tax? How much does it take in order to see this vision through? And that's what I would be asking you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
So I have a question regarding the the baseball stadium upgrade. Supposing, supposing we do what's proposed and we issue $200 million or so of bonds for this project, but it's not exactly a county project per se. It's being done on behalf of Gateway and the baseball team. My question is, to what extent does that impact our debt capacity or our affordability in the same way that a direct county project like the jail would do, or does it have less of an impact?
Councilman, we can talk about the affordability plan, I think, on Thursday's Committee of the Whole meeting. I think that's on the agenda. So we do have an affordability plan in place to present. But from a capacity and an ability, yes, issuing debt for the project would take away from capacity if it's done.
Okay. Please continue.
That's it.
That's it. Okay. So I have one other question, and that's regarding the jail. And the question is, based on your understanding of approximately what this project looks like, what's your best understanding of what would be the right way to finance this project? What would the plan look like?
Well, we haven't decided, or the plan has not been decided by the administration to present to the council yet. So we've been working just on very preliminary kind of guidelines. So what I feel like we could say, because we don't really know yet exactly how it's going to be done, is utilizing what has been utilizing the sales tax and minimizing risk to the county in the intermediate time are the two primary objectives. And I know that's difficult to ascertain what I'm saying there, but that's kind of all I can say at this point, because I don't want to give any misinformation.
So I understood about the first one, about utilizing the sales tax. That's pretty straightforward. But the other one about minimizing the risk in the intermediate term, what does that entail?
But if using an analogy, not a limousine analogy, because I don't know those very well, but using an analogy, if you enter into a home mortgage or a car loan, you have to start paying soon. And that's the same thing with bonding. You can't, it's difficult to make the cash flows work without having payments soon. So it's how do we minimize the risk and how do we minimize the payment to the county until 2028? And that's the balance.
Till when?
In 2028.
Okay, so you're talking about lesser paybacks until we get the bonds in 2027 off the table.
Yes.
So the other comment I'd like to make about this is that that we've already had to approve some elements for the jail project relating to the design process and at some point fairly soon we're going to have to select a design builder and I think this message isn't to you that we just hire you to consult for us, but but the message is to the administration. It's time that you bring us a reasonably detailed plan on how you propose to fund the project, and I would just ask the administration to do that sooner rather than later. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll just put out one more, which is regarding the Justice Center, and my question is do you foresee affordability constraints if we do the ballpark, the jail, and the Justice Center?
It's the ballpark. The ballpark and the jail, I think, are easy. I think yes, because we're confidently close on what those numbers will be. But it's really hard to say what it will look like for the Justice Center because we just don't know yet. Going back to a previous statement, the county does have significant flexibility in how to finance that. Even if there's plenty of capacity, there could be other reasons why you might not want to use that type of capacity for GO or sales tax. Maybe there's a certificates of participation structure that kind of gets around those limitations. But it's just difficult to say. But I do feel that the county has a number of tools to handle that project when it comes up.
And just one peripheral comment that we have a pretty good idea on the cost of the jail, as long as we're somewhere close to the size that was originally intended in the consultant's recommendations. If that were changed, then the cost is going to change in a major way. So that's an uncertainty at this time. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate the update.
All right, thank you. Thank you, council members.
Okay, we are going to now move on to our second presentation, which is the presentation on the ERP, and we're going to have Director Johnson and our new ERP lead, Connie Geddes, making the presentation, and I presume that Director Johnson's going to begin, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Councilman Miller. First of all, thanks to the committee for giving us a chance to bring you up to speed on where we're at with the ERP program. I know there's been a lot of talk about that, and again, thank you for your time. As I think back over the last couple of months since I've been appointed the Chief Information Officer for Cuyahoga County, I've done a lot of reflecting, as also a lot of observing. And one of the things that I'm reflecting on is my commitment during the hearing as to providing clarity. Clarity on what we're doing to council, clarity on what we're doing to the administration. And ERP certainly would qualify as an area where I think we could achieve some more clarity. But also in terms of my observation, I've observed, and I alluded to this last time I spoke to you, that we really have some outstanding team members in our IT department. And particularly in the ERP area, we have a dedicated, motivated team that is working extremely hard, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But in regards to both of those areas, I've decided to change the format a little bit, and I asked Connie to provide the updates to council. Connie has been the project leader for this piece of the ERP since last July, so a little over a year. And so just a slight correction on that, Councilman Miller. Connie has been boots on the ground working with the team for a little over a year now. And so to provide that clarity, but also to elevate some of these outstanding people that are on the ERP team, That's why we've changed it up. We've asked Connie to make this presentation. We think that will give council a clearer view as to what's happening on the project. It gives our administration a clearer view as to what's happening on the project. So I know this is a big change. I know that this may be something, I phoned a few of you to let you know this was happening. So I'd like to pause there and entertain any questions that you may have about this recent move.
Councilman Gallagher.
Director, how does this change whose head's going to roll if this doesn't continue to do what it's supposed to do? Because last time it was Jack Ryan. Is Jack Ryan's head rolled off of this somewhere else?
Yeah, so a couple things. So just to be clear, when it comes to the IT department, I am the accountable person for that. On the project, Connie will be responsible. So again, accountability rides with me. It's my department. I'm accountable. I answer to you ultimately.
So Connie's the boss.
Connie is the project leader of the ERP program.
And who does Connie answer to?
So Connie, it's not official yet, but Connie will report to me. Now, that sounds a little confusing. Connie is actually going to be the head of our PMO, our project management organization. She will have responsibility for all projects or programs across the county that are sizable, right? So she will, in that capacity, report to me. Connie is actually doing double duty and has been doing double duty of running our PMO, or at least trying to start our PMO organization, and managing the ERP project. As far as, I think you asked about Jack, Jack will continue as the Deputy CIO. The Deputy CIO role, though, as I look at it and as I read it and as I interpret what that job description is a lot more strategic. It is one where we're looking at the bigger strategy of what we're going to do with this ID department. And I've asked Jack to not focus on the operation of the projects. We've got Connie to do that. And to help me focus on what are we going to do as an IT department moving forward? What are we going to do for some of those bigger questions that I'm sure we'll cover at later times? And so again, Jack's responsibility for the project is no longer there. That would be, again, responsible for Connie, accountable for me.
As you know, and we talked actually before you took the job, is no one's been held accountable. No one. Not one single individual has been held accountable. They've left before potential accountability was thrown their way. But nobody in Cuyahoga County seems to be held accountable for anything. And I told you then, I'm going to tell you now, it's got to stop. The way I'm looking at this, Jack got a shift to the left. Is his pay the same?
It is.
Why?
Right, but as with anybody that's on my staff, particularly in an unclassified role, that's continually going to be evaluated.
Okay.
So I will tell you that in this role, and I've had similar roles in the private sector, if it's done right, it can absolutely be completely economical. It can be a very big impact to the county. If it's done wrong, again, as anybody in the organization, then changes will have to be made.
As we found out for the past over 3 years. That's all I'm looking at. You know,
Okay.
Things are going to go wrong, and I'll tell Connie this, and she probably already knows it, and I think I could speak for everybody up here. We just want the truth. We haven't gotten the truth. Have actually been lied to in this room, in this chambers, in an official meeting of a council. Now, we saw where that went somewhere else. And I'm sick and tired of not being told the truth, and I shared that with you. And this isn't an indication to either one of you. But that has to stop. That has to stop. All we want to know is the truth, so we can prepare ourselves for the bad things coming down the road. And this has been a long road, as Connie, I know you're aware. And all we want to do is, where's the end line? How do we get there? Don't play games with 92% done when it's really 73% done, which that should have got somebody fired. And it didn't. no accountability. So I'm looking to you to gear up the accountability. We're held accountable every 4 years. And we've lost a lot of money on this project, as again, you are all aware. So, Connie, I wish you nothing but the best of luck. And all we want is give us the bad news before it really gets out there so we can prepare ourselves. We're not holding anything against anybody from this day going forward. You got a clean slate. You've been here since last July, so you know exactly what's going on here. And I'm not going to even ask you. I debated on asking you in your professional career if you've ever seen such a wreck. But I'm not going to ask you that because I think we all know the answer. And I'm not even just picking on Jack. I think it goes up to that board, that unnamed board, where nobody's held accountable. Haven't then, aren't now. So good luck. Please tell us the truth. We're just trying to help you out. And we want to get to the end of this so we can move on to the next thing. I think we're all ERP'd out, quite honestly. Thank you.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, Chair, if I may just
Yes.
ask, and this may be answered as we go on through your slides, but usually when you have a transition from one person to another, especially when it's key roles, is there anything that we need to be prepared for that were surprises that sets us back? That said, whoa, we have to change horses because we're in a position where we used to call it stabilizing, or maybe we still call it stabilize, but we have to stabilize again. I mean, is there any real setbacks here that were discovered, which was one of the reasons why we might have had to change in what we're doing? Or are we on task, picking up where we left off and still looking towards a positive outcome?
So I would think that, well, first of all, the presentation that we'll give you, Councilman Baker, I think will explain a lot of that. And so there, Councilman Gallagher talked about the truth. And I think one of the things that you will find is that Connie will speak the truth. And so you'll see in our presentation anything that might be a surprise. And I will be honest, I'm not sure what will be a surprise to you. You'll have to call us out on that if it's a surprise. So I think that you will hear that truth and you will see that in the presentation. As far as picking up, right? Picking up where we left off. I don't know that I wouldn't say there's so much of a pick up where we left off. Yes, in some of our presentations, they may be a little bit, little rough kind of as we're making this transition. Some of our presentations may not be the exact same, so they may look a little bit different, but that's all in an attempt to give you clarity. To say that we're picking up, I don't think that's true. I think that we're moving with this project, and Connie has been there to push this along, to pull this along in some cases. So anyway, that would be my thoughts on your comments.
I would just, to follow up, I guess I'm just asking, with this type of transition, we're not hearing automatic 3 months we're behind. Automatically, because of this transition, this person has to get up to speed, is working double, is taking the place of, I'm not hearing that, and I guess that's where my question came from, is that this isn't something that puts us back, we lost ground, doesn't sound like it.
This transition, what you hear in the presentation coming up, this transition is not the cause of any of that. This transition, I think I would view that as a very positive event in the execution of this project. And again, that's to the team's credit. That's to Connie's credit. And again, making this allows you to have a closer view of what's happening on the ground.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so is Connie ready to begin?
Thank
So before you do, I just want to mention that we don't have flexibility on time today because we have another committee at 3, and we want to allow plenty of time for questions and answers from the council. So please be crisp and concise and move it along so that we have time.
I appreciate that, Councilman Miller. All right, do we have the presentation ready? Okay. All Again, thank you for allowing us to present this afternoon. Again, my name is Connie Geddes, and as indicated, I've been working on this project since July of last year. I have been working on other county implementations for ERP since May of 2019. So I'm very familiar with the stabilization project and can provide some feedback there, as well as the payroll and WFM project. So there we go. Sorry, didn't want to behave there. Just some of the things that we want to talk about here today is, again, looking at what this project timeline, entails. And as we can see it, with true clarity. We want to look at this first parallel that we ran that encompassed about 1,000 county users, what our initial findings are, and how is that predicting future success for the project. We want to look at what the current status of the project is in terms of remaining open issues, concerns we have, risk that there are. We definitely want to talk about the team, right? I don't think that there's really been a lot of recognition for how small or acknowledgement of how small this team is and how much we've been able to accomplish. And looking at, again, recommendations moving forward for how to support ERP in full. Talk a little bit about some of the go-live requirements, right? We can't go live unprepared. I think it would be very foolish for us to sit there and say that we're going to hit a date and find out that we have 8,000 people that are getting incorrect paychecks, right? So we want to be very smart about how we're approaching this. Take a little quick look at the project financials. And then again, one very important part of this is, what do we have as a mitigation plan? In terms of what has been told and what the timeline is with that, do we have any contingencies built in? And we certainly do, so we want to go ahead and exercise a discussion around that. All right, what we see here on the graphics is just a current snapshot of what our existing legacy structure is. The idea here is that basically from the way we capture time, process time, and execute payroll is that it's existing in architecture that's not only outdated, but it's at high risk, right? It's out of support, and we have very few people supporting these systems, but I think we are in much more danger of keeping these systems around than moving forward and successfully implementing our current, which is going to be our future, time entry system and payroll processing system. All right, the timeline that we have sketched out here, as you can see in September, we actually executed the first of a full, what we call a full parallel. It's approximately 10% of the county population. That was one pay period, so 2 weeks of time entry. What that means is that for the rest of October, we now have to go ahead and process this information. Not only do we have to process the new information out of the new time entry system, but we also want to look at the current system, right? And we have to do some comparisons between them to find out how accurate we are with that information. Are the taxes calculating correctly? Are we getting the right deductions, garnishments, and so on? Are the hours calculating correctly coming out of the time entry systems? So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in order to really get to that analysis and true data. So that's one thing you will hear is that we're asking for that time to get through and do a full analysis throughout this month of October. That doesn't mean that we're sitting idle. There's a lot of activity that's going on. Again, we just finished the parallel, right? So what are we doing? We're fixing a lot of the issues that have risen through that parallel. We're also planning, if we move down the chart a little bit, in the red, it talks about cutover. So if we are preparing a go live with a target time entry date of 12/19, we only have about 7 weeks to go ahead and prepare all of these systems for a production go live readiness. That goes beyond just all the systematic changes. That's all the training that we have to do. That's all of the change management and communication that we have to do. So we've got a lot ahead of us. Again, I think we've got a good line of sight on this. And that would take us to a first payroll check being processed out of the new payroll system on 1/7. What you see below in purple, I guess, is parallel number 2. So how are we going to manage that while we're prepping for go live, right? It's going to be very challenging. I'll be upfront about that. Again, I've already mentioned we've got a very small team. So we have to be very, very efficient and very strategic about how we're going to go ahead and accomplish this. We will get to more information as we go, but I did call out that that is a risk, right? So we are going to leverage consultants to help, as we have, to augment the team. But really, it's just having very specific focus on task instead of jumping between, hey, I'm going to support this parallel, but I'm also going to execute this cutover. We're going to have a team dedicated to cutover activities, one dedicated to parallel activities. There will be a team, obviously a time where we'll have to, step over and help, but it's going to be very streamlined. Any questions on this before we go further?
I do have a question.
Ms. Baker.
Okay, so I think and as I mentioned, I think earlier, what's frustrating about this timeline is that we were going to have payroll launched end of last year. And then we realized that stabilization in the project was needed. And we thought that April was going to be the first quarter, first launch. And then that changed to August. Now we're coming into the end of the year, hoping for a January 1st. But I guess where I just can't seem to get my arms around is that we knew back in January of 2021 that we were going to concentrate on payroll so that we can launch it either within 2021 or at the latest by the 1st. I know you're squeezed in time now and you're trying to do these go lives in a very short period of time, but that's not the timeline that we had. We had the timeline of January 1st of 2021 to prepare for January 1st, 2022. So, and you've been there since July working on this. Where did you see that we were struggling in the stabilization piece that was supposed to take 6 months, which seems like a long period of time for modules we've already launched? Where did you find the issues or problems of what delayed us from even getting into payroll until later on into this year that now squeezes you in time to try to still get it done by January 1st?
Yeah, great questions, Councilperson Baker. I think the first thing to address is the stabilization, right? So as you mentioned, and I'm glad that it was very clear that these are modules that have already been launched, specifically around the general human resources, around fiscal, and around procurement. What I think the biggest impact there was, again, resources, right? So we had to go ahead and look at these modules because they were experiencing some severe issues, right? So there was a project team put together to do that. And again, it was also augmented with consulting personnel. So that took away from our ability to go ahead and efficiently, work through this very quickly. The other thing that I would like to say is that, again, I'm the old person on the team, I hate that word. From longstanding being on the project, I should say. The senior, there you go. And when we get to the team dynamic chart, you'll see a lot of the members have just joined the team this year. So the project from our perspective, from an ERP payroll and workforce management timekeeping system, is really a relatively new project. It's only been a little over a year. And I'll go as far as saying we did have to go to a point and basically strip the project back down and build it back up. There were a lot of things that we just couldn't figure out why it was done. And, we brought everybody in, including the business, and we really worked through it and built a plan that we're still using to go ahead and work through that. So it's a little over a year that, again, me being the longest member on the team, it's not really long when you're talking about a payroll system of this magnitude. So I know that doesn't help because, again, there have been years of work prior to that. But we have made such great progress and efficiencies in this program. So I can tell you, I think we absolutely have a line of sight on a go live and a realistic line of sight. It might not be the way you're expecting it, and that's why we want to talk about contingency. But there are real issues. And again, I think one of the biggest things we've struggled with is lack of resources. We have a lot of things that this team is just carrying the load for, and it's been an extreme challenge to launch this any faster.
If I may just follow, so do you think today, October, whatever it is, the 4th, and you're looking forward to trying to still meet a timeline that I'm not sure was realistic in January of this year, understanding that stabilization sounds like critically needed in order to continue with the modules that were already launched and paid for, and at that point, it should have been just operational. It doesn't sound like it was, though. It sounds like we went right back in it to try and, I don't know, fix what issues there were. Do you think today in October, you're confident that you have enough of a handle on this? As you said earlier in your presentation, we don't want payroll to have any errors, that you have enough time. And I hate to ask this question because I really don't want to see it go any longer.
Right, I understand.
But do you have the resources and the people that have the ability to get this done as we move forward?
Yeah, that's a very challenging question, right? So we'll talk about, the resources that we feel we need. So now you have to balance, onboarding someone, getting them up to speed. Is that really going to be a hindrance based on how we've been operating? I think from a support and go-live perspective, it's absolutely something that the ERP team needs to do to properly support and give these systems, the management that they need, and to be successful with them moving forward. We are literally single-threaded. You will see we lost one of our main key players in this. The other thing to address is that we've had a lot of turnover in the workforce management, the WFM module. So we have, through this turnover, we had a lot of things that, we'd say were working. And now we dive into it and we find out it's not working the way it used to. So was it this person or that person? Was it a systematic issue? It's been really, really frustrating for us, and again, challenging to try and make sure that we've got this system configured and functioning the way that it needs to. And that, again, enforces this contingency plan. We want to make sure that this workforce management system is spot on. There are too many different scenarios that need to be captured between different shift patterns, different calculation groups, different bargaining units, and any of these things that aren't set and tested correctly, could just be terrible. So we want to do our due diligence and give it the extra little time that it may need to go ahead and do so.
All right, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
So I would like to call everybody's attention to something new that we saw on this past slide, if you could put that back up there.
Sure.
Which is the 11/7 date for the second parallel.
Oh, hold on. That's the same slide then.
That's been TBD until now, so we have that date up there. And the question I have is when is it that you have to make a final go, no-go decision, first of all, on initiating cutover activities on 11/1, and secondly, on initiating the second parallel on 11/7?
Great question, Councilman Miller. I would say that we are looking for that last week of October to go ahead and do a go, no-go for that cutover. So that's going to be really significant. As we discussed earlier, we need that time to really do a full analysis of where we're at. I will give you initial, feedback and findings, but I think at this point it's premature to make assumptions and set dates without absolute, understanding of that information. And for the parallel, I think, again, at this point, it really comes down to how fast is this team working through the resolutions. I would expect within the next 2 weeks, because we have to communicate out to the participants, right? We want to make sure we're giving them, enough time to prepare, for another test coming up. So they know that they've got a little bit more time to work through that and have a confidence that, we can go ahead and put them through and actually be successful, knowing that the improvements, and corrections that were made are going to work.
So you're talking something like October 19th for a decision on the parallel, which actually will come first, and the cutover can wait a little bit longer until the last week in October for
Yeah, I
final
believe that
go,
that's
no-go
accurate.
decision.
Yeah,
Okay.
only because, again, a parallel, we are, we're in testing mode, right? The biggest component there, it's twofold. We want to make sure that the system's ready. And then two, we want to make sure that we have enough time to work on a big engagement, making sure we have as many people working and testing the system as possible.
And for parallel number 2, are you talking about the same number of people as the first parallel, which was about 1,000 or so, or are you going to try for a larger number?
So that is going to, we're looking for the recommendation from the WF team to give us their feedback. I believe that as the experts in this module, that they will know strategically how they need to go ahead and test this for parallel 2. So I really look for their recommendation to come back, and then I'd be happy to go ahead and let you know what that number is.
Okay, so that's a TBD.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Baker.
So having said that, 1,000 in the next test, if we only go 1,000, that only leaves one more to do the full test? Is that what we're saying?
No, the tests are independent. They're each the same group of people, right?
Okay.
So if we engaged 1,000 people for the first parallel, for the second one, the expectation would be that we would run it again for that full 1,000.
Same.
Looking, yeah, the same, right. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. One being, we're getting the same people in this system, right? And you have to understand, it's that large number is to cover all the different scenarios to make sure that everything is being tested and calculated. So what we want to do is make sure that we're getting all of that in there. And we're also then looking at these people becoming basically our subject matter experts, right? So then we would have a high confidence that at each agency that these people could go in and have someone, a handful of people that are very comfortable utilizing the system. So I think from a go-live perspective, that only makes sense as well.
When would you make the decision to do the full 8,000 before you would actually go live for 8,000?
So I don't think we're going to do a parallel of 8,000. I think we will just go live. Again, the idea being that if we know we have tested every possible scenario of this system, then we have the confidence that we have covered everybody and we can successfully go live.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Okay. So again, just to be clear, I'm looking for a recommendation from the team, though, to come back for the second parallel, for them to say, you know what, maybe we want to increase this number, maybe we want to stay at 1,000, maybe we want to decrease it because we're looking at something strategic. I'm not sure yet, but certainly when that recommendation comes back, I'm happy to share that with you.
Thank you. Please proceed. That gives us some good information.
Okay. All right, so here looking, again, lots of numbers, but just some of the initial things that we have coming out of the first full parallel. These numbers were from late last week, understanding every day we are working through them. And if you can see, we've had a total of 233 issues that were logged from this parallel. That is the time entry system, right? So that raises at least my eyebrows to say, okay, we had a lot of issues, right? And we broke it down between training issues, again, that was one, but some serious ones like time clocks. Again, we resolved most of those. You can see, even just using that as an example, we knocked out 31 of them very quick. So we still had, as of last week, 127 issues still to work through. I'm sorry, that was the close. We still have 106 issues to go through. Now, I would assume as of today, that number's a little bit less. The team is working very, very methodically through these issues. We gave them, about a week to go ahead and group and really organize these and put a plan of attack around it. So with that 106, we already have 22 that we're ready to retest as part of this full parallel, just because we want to make sure we're validating this. We don't want to go ahead and have these same issues arise during the next parallel.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
just a question as relates to issues. It's a very broad term. So how are you identifying an issue? Is it a matter of formula? One of the things you identified were the time clock. So is it a software issue? Is it what constitutes an issue? And when you're talking about over 100, but you're able to deal with a significant number, is it a tweaking of one formula that can correct potentially multiple issues?
That is very dependent on what the issue is. I would say when we're looking at the WFM type issues that are listed there, it could be we correct a shift pattern, and maybe that then corrects another configuration issue that they were having. I would like to basically consider them all separate. So like a time clock issue could have been someone's badge just wasn't swiping. They were getting an invalid badge, right? Well, that person, we may have found out, received a new badge, but it wasn't updated in the system, right? There was another one that received an invalid badge, and it was because their badge number wasn't, coming over correctly in the system. So there's a broad range of issues that we're experiencing. And, again, there were some things, user errors as well, right? And that's to be expected when you're talking about 1,000 people using a new system. So it's all that change management, getting people comfortable with what they're clicking on.
And so two more questions to that point. Have we identified the percentage of user issues versus, I guess, software or technical issues? And then the other question would be, I guess, one issue could very well fix something, but it seems like it could also cause another problem.
Could very well, right?
Okay, all
So
right.
that's where the validation is coming in, and that's where, again, I kind of gave them the green light to sit there and say, you tell me what that strategy looks like to make sure that any of these changes that you're making are valid, right? And that we can really just sign off and say that this is working as expected.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, we'll go through this slide fairly quick. Basically, I just wanted to say that we had a significant amount of participation. When we went through the training, we had 88% engagement. That number is very large based on at least my previous experience working with different modules here. That was because we did a lot of change management, a lot of communication with the directors and agency leads to make sure that they understood the importance of going through this testing. So that number was actually higher than I expected. However, we still need to get that 100%, right? So we have to look at what can we do better, for the next parallel, for those that haven't been trained. And then when we go live, how do we apply this to 5,400 other people? So we learn and we improve. So that number was great. Again, we still have some work ahead of us. Regarding the actual participation, that number was at 90%. So that number could be a little misleading, right? It could be someone that, again, had, let's go back to the badge issue. They couldn't swipe their badge for 3 days, and then we got that badge issue resolved. So they were fine on that Thursday and Friday, and then the full week following. But we had 3 days where we didn't capture their information. So that's an incomplete time record, right? So when we would go ahead and compare that to their normal clock system, we're going to get discrepancies. So we have to make sure that we understand that even though we had 90% participation, that didn't necessarily equate to 90% of completed time records. So again, a lot of work that we have to do to go ahead and make sure that we have that 100%, so that when we process and go live, that our payroll officers know how to go in and do their time corrections. And that, of course, comes after just even getting users in and getting them comfortable with the system. So just again, some other stats here. Remaining on this project, we have 86 open project tasks. Those are off to the right. They're categorized if you just wanted that breakdown. But we have 34 that are still open items. Again, this was as of Friday for full parallel tasks. So you ask, okay, we're in a parallel. How do we still have open items? Well, some of these items, remember, this parallel is going through the end of October. So some of these items aren't due yet. It could be the way that we transfer a file to OPERS, or send an ACH, payment to the bank to test, or printing of paper checks. So those items are still accounted for on the open task list because they haven't occurred yet. So I just wanted to make sure that that was very clear. From a go-live perspective, we have 49 tasks that we still need to get done. Some of them large, some of them small. Again, it's going to be a race to the finish, but we're going to do it, and we're going to make sure that it's valid. That's why that go, no-go is going to be really critical. But again, right now, the team is feeling positive, but make no mistake, we know that we have a lot of work still ahead of us. And then we have 3 post-go-live tasks. So how do we go ahead and run certain things after we're done and everybody's launched? So 86 remaining tasks. All right, what I wanted to do here was just point out our payroll team. And this is a real good, true picture. So again, top is just a couple of project managers. Then 3 through 5 are our business leads. 6 through 8 are critical holes that we have in this project. And again, when I give credit to this team, it's with these holes, and they're significant. Our fiscal payroll business lead left at the end of August. So now we're working with the fiscal team to make sure that we can train up the remainder of their staff to make sure that they can actually process payroll go live, right? And I believe that they are looking, possibly, I'm not sure, what their recruiting is or if they're recruiting for that position, but that's a huge hole for us. The other 2 that are distinctly Department of IT is the ERP administrator. Andy referenced our ERP manager opening. We lost that resource, I believe, in March. And then our WFM lead. We've been running this project without a lead for our time entry system. That has been a huge challenge. And again, the team has been working really hard to try and cover this massive hole that we have.
Who was the last ERP administrator and the last WFM lead?
So it wasn't administrator, it was, I believe the title was ERP manager. Okay, and that was Bob Knoll. And the WFM lead at the time was Jarrell Thompson. So if we look at 9 through 15, there's your team running WFM and payroll for Cuyahoga County for 8,000 people. You can see there's technical, there's functional. I have 1 payroll lead, I have 1 security person, 1 HR. It's really impressive to look at how small this team is and how much work we're actually doing. Any questions on this slide?
Yes. What additional resources would you need to achieve a full go-live on January 1st, and what are we doing to try to get them?
Again, another great question, Councilman Miller. So I'll go ahead and flip to the next slide, and these are apparently, I think, what the correct staffing solution should be moving forward for the entire ERP project. So this is a little bit more global outside of specific workforce management and payroll. I believe that we absolutely need to get a change management lead. I don't know if that would be a Department of IT resource. I would love that. It could be an HR resource. We are starting to try and leverage and work with the HR team to use some of their change management in the meantime. A product manager to really help support this product and work with the business to understand options moving forward and functionality. We have no QA resources. Our testing right now is done by the people that are actually developing the system, along with the business units. Again, we don't have a WFM lead, but in that case, once that hole is filled, we need a secondary resource. One, also to support payroll, and then two, I think, to round out the technical, and two more for the functional resources for the ERP team.
And what are we doing to try to obtain these resources?
Great question. So we are working with HR right now. I know we are targeting the technical and/or functional resources right now. They've done some recruiting. I believe as of Thursday, we did get some applicants in, understanding that Infor is a very, very niche ERP system. I don't think that that's a blocker. I think if someone comes in, right, young, ambitious, talented, especially if they have any ERP experience, I think that they would be a great addition to the team. So we're not really staying single focused on who we want to bring in, but it's really critical to make sure we get the right person in to fill these spots, right? Bodies don't mean anything. They've got to be the right bodies to be able to support this.
And are we looking for consultants as well as employees?
I don't think we're looking anymore for consultants. I think, again, we've augmented the team as much as we can, and I feel, again, this is a really difficult, situation to be in. Well, if you got somebody in and they could help, get you to that finish line, a little bit more confidently, regardless, they still need to be trained up in all of the, configurations for the county and all the nuances there. So I look at that again to complement, as we're going live, looking at these people to bring them on, but not necessarily our solution to get us there faster, because it's going to take time. It's going to take time to hire the right person and to onboard them.
Well, you're right about that, and there's probably people who know more than I do, but it's only 3 months until January 1, and the county's hiring process is slow. It is really
Agreed.
slow. And so I think we should be pursuing all avenues, and that we should be looking at both consultants and employees, and be ready to add whatever we can get to provide the resources to get us there for January 1.
I do agree. Yeah, I think the consultants that we do have, again, we're working very efficiently with them. We've had discussions with the team, and at this point, bringing other ones in probably would actually cause a little bit more of, stepping on toes. We've got them really working well through that. So I think from that standpoint, we're not looking to engage in any more consultants. And I can show you on the next slide. There's just a representation of who we have that we're referencing as far as our consulting.
Ms. Baker, did you have a question, or was it covered?
Just a quick one. Given the 3 openings that we have and another 7 that you'd like to hire, and looking back at what we had in what we used to do back, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, are we growing in this department? Are we having to grow and add personnel, and especially at higher rates, because of this decision to go with the ERP? And how can we justify that if the answer is probably yes, that we are growing and adding more higher level employees in order to continue and do this correctly? What is the return on investment?
Again, a great question, Councilperson Baker. And Andy, I don't know if you have any feedback on this, but I'd love to take it.
It doesn't have to be answered now. It can wait till another meeting. This is more kind of in the weeds. But I think that is a question that we're going to need to, once we perhaps launch and we...
No, I agree. Unfortunately, the problem that we've had is the turnover, right? So it hasn't just been the 3 that you've seen. We've had turnover for years in this project. So yeah, the technology's newer. I would expect that you should expect, that they potentially are paid at a higher rate. But that's, a little bit outside of where my focus is right now.
I understand that. I guess a snapshot in time of where we were, why it was needed that we move forward with the ERP, and where we're going to be once payroll is launched. And then finally, the return on investment for making that decision. That's another meeting probably, but I know I will ask it when the time comes.
Sure. Okay, and again, being conscientious of time, we'll move on here. So just the next slide is just some of the criteria that we're expecting prior to going live with ERP. And ERP, again, it's this particular case is WFM and payroll. We need at least 2 successful tests, right? I can't tell you if the parallel number 1 is a success yet, because again, we're still collecting and working through this data. Initial indications are that the team, even though we have a severe number of issues, more of the challenge is going to be all of the other ancillary things, training people. Like that's a big concern, right? That could be a showstopper there, hitting, a 12/19 time entry date. But systematically, a lot of errors, nothing that is indicating that the system's broken. There's just a lot of fixing that needs to happen and a lot of validation. And some of those could be correcting. Let's go back to shift patterns, because that's fairly, I think, straightforward. It might not be a very difficult task, but it could be very time consuming. And we want to make sure that everybody has this information correctly configured in the system. So with that being said, it also takes time to test and validate. So good news is nothing scary. Bad news is a lot of items that we still need to work through. Okay. We still also then, another bullet item down there is UAT. We still need to go ahead and make sure that the business user accepts this module. That's something that we haven't done yet. It's not unusual at this point. Typically, you would go through tests, right? You want to make sure you're presenting the best system you can before the business signs off on it. So that makes logical sense. Unfortunately, we have to be creative, right, on how we're going to achieve that and get the business to sign off and make sure that they are saying, yes, we're putting our name to this module and accept it, and it's ready to go live. So just put that in there as one of the criteria for go live. And then again, the training. That's not a small undertaking by any stretch of the imagination. On the roster that I showed you, we hired 1 logistics coordinator. So glad she hasn't left yet, because she had a great deal of challenges to try and just line up, who the participants were, making sure we had the right supervisors, making sure we had all of the different scenarios, accounted for. So now we have to tweak that again for our second parallel, and anything that we found out, hey, I'm not really that person's supervisor anymore. We're making all of those changes again. But from a go-live perspective, we now have around 5,400 other users that we have to test. And I say 54 because we know there's roughly 8,000 users in the county. We had a test of 1,000, right? So that doesn't seem to add up. Keep in mind, we have roughly 2,000 to 2,500 users that don't even use the WFM module. So they will go right through S3 processing and use the payroll system alone. So from a WFM perspective, that's roughly 5,400 users that still need to be trained. All right, I'm going to take a little breath here and let Andy talk about some of the project financials.
So thanks, Connie. So one of the things that will be changing and that you can count on is Connie will be taking responsibility for the entirety of the program or entirety of the project, and that includes the financials too. But in this transition period, there just wasn't enough time to appropriately make that transition to Connie. So I'm going to step in, give you what I understand these financials to be, try to talk through it with you in plain English, and happy to answer any questions. I'm not as intimate at the details as I need to be, So I'm happy to take any comments back with me to research. But let me start walking through at least the financials as I understand it from what was told to you in our last meeting, July 19th, 2021. And I'm working in the upper right quadrant of the presentation. And I'm working my way down where you see our consulting services at 17 million. You see our backfill at 4 million. Walking down where you see that we have our subtotal for external services being at 28.9 million. Our capitalized internal labor, right, that labor that we're using that is our county employees, that their time is devoted to this project, is estimated to be about $7 million. And that gives us a total of $35.9 million that we forecast this program, or that we forecasted for this program at the last meeting. Now, taking a breath here, moving forward, when we take back and we look at what is it going to take to run us through February of next year, there's a couple changes that are coming into play here. And I'll talk about the heavier hitters right now. And that's first the surety contract, where we're talking about an increase of $378,000. Not a small amount. I totally appreciate that. Where this comes into play is I think it was during the July timeframe, maybe June timeframe, there was some negotiations with Infor. Infor was to provide payroll consultants, and that did not happen. And so Surety was already contracted to help us with operations. We then needed those payroll resources back at that point, brought them in, and that started ratcheting up what the Surety invoice was going to be. We also burned through more hours than was initially anticipated, so that raised that number to Surety that we are going to forecast owing through the rest of the year. We had a WFM, as Connie talked about. We had our WFM issue where we lost a WFM lead, had to bring in a consultant to fill that gap. Through working with Infor, and I think we saw that on a previous slide, we had an Infor consultant come back for WFM, and so that required a lot of re-engineering of the Infor contract. And you've heard us talk about change orders, and so change order 66 came along. It was a non-dollar figure, but it adjusted who Infor was providing us for resources. No, that sounded very confusing, so for now, I can tell you anything I need to explain on that more. There was a lot of moving pieces during that time. I'll pause there. Any questions there? Okay. So let me give you a couple more bullet points on the financials here. We took a look at our training support. And since Connie mentioned we are moving more towards an internal model, working with HR for training, we felt like we could reduce that number from our forecast, as well as hardware. Felt like we had too much hardware in the forecast, so we were able to reduce that number to by 161,000. So the net result of what I just told you in terms of financial, in terms of the changes with the surety contract, we are planning on a $272,000 increase to what our forecasted amount was. And so I don't completely 100% understand the budgeting process, and so my understanding is that we will have to get an appropriation. We'll be asking for an appropriation for that additional amount of money. I'll pause there.
So, Chair, what we can expect then is you're asking for an additional appropriation of $36,000. Total forecasted program cost after.
So that total forecasted program cost is $36 million.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Zero's wrong.
A lot of numbers, I get it.
All right, so what is the total that you're asking?
The number above that where it says total changes.
272,000?
Exactly, that's the number. Now, I know that there's a desire that we ask for all the money we need at one time. We say, okay, here's the money that we need to carry us through. As Connie mentioned, we have October that we're going through to analyze what has happened inside of the parallel test. And I would like to reserve the opportunity to come back and talk through what does that mean to that change? I'd like to do one change, as I think that you all would like to do. I'm not sure if we can hold out for that appropriation for 272,000, but I need to do my homework and understand that process, understand what is in the surety contract that can carry us through and how long we can wait before that appropriation. Again, the idea coming back to you with one number rather than coming back multiple times.
So May, try this again. So does the 272,000 get us to the first of the year
Yes.
by your best estimate?
By our best estimates right now, understanding where we're at, yes.
Director actually said February.
Yes,
February.
through February, yes,
Okay.
sorry.
Continue.
Only other thing I might add is I know in county economics or county bookkeeping, we really talk about the actual spend. What's the check that we've written so far? We're at 31.75 million on checks that have been written as well as capitalized labor. Keep that in mind. We have spent, what is that, 31,750 to 36.2. We have $5 million or so to run us through the end of this project. Most of that is consumed by Infor. A portion of about $1 million is for capitalized labor.
One thing we've discussed at previous meetings is the fact that there's a closely related budget module that depends on payroll and WFM that has to be operationalized shortly after payroll and WFM go live. And my question is whether these financials include that as well.
They do, Councilman Miller. That number is inside of those financials.
Okay, thank you.
Another question maybe would be the right time to ask. We've had, through the course of the last year, maybe last 2 years, some introductions of different language like stabilizing, and we had to understand what that meant to go back. And then there were, different from that was operational. We had to continue with the operational support, different than the capital costs. There was also, I think, mentioned different parts of the ERP that were delayed. I think there was another word for it, but that's kind of what it is. Is what part of the ERP project, when we first decided to move forward and encompassed all that we would be getting within the ERP function and program, what pieces are not in this in order to complete payroll by January 1st? What are we missing that you'll be coming back for, asking us to, if there is such a thing? But I do believe there were some pretty major things that could wait and needed to wait so we can focus on stabilizing, operating, capital, and now.
You're absolutely right, Councilwoman Baker. There are 3 modules, and I can picture the chart with those 3 modules, but I don't think I have it with me at the moment. But you're absolutely right, and I will forward that over to you. Those 3, I think it was a year or 2 ago, were agreed that those would be tabled and set aside. There is no budget left for those 3 modules. So in my mind, as I think about that and I look at that, yes, those 3 were purchased, but I think we have to take a hard look and say, does the business case warrant pulling those 3 in? And it very well might. Does it warrant using internal labor? If we staff up, can our internal department pull those 3 live? So that business analysis on those 3 has not been done, but that's something that needs to happen, and we owe that answer. Does it make sense, or do we collectively believe, hey, the dollars to get those 3 modules, it just isn't worth it. We need to be able to answer that question with figures, and we do not have those. But if you think back to that, there's a color-coded chart. It's got a bunch of boxes on it. 3 of those are the ones that were set aside, if memory serves me right.
Thank you. And to follow up on that, there was also talk maybe a year and a half to 2 years ago that perhaps may not be needed, and that was updating. That was, this program will need to be updated or reconfigured, or I'm not quite sure. But is that still something that is out there, that when we finally finish and celebrate our payroll being finished and things are stabilized and don't have to go, is there a cost of upgrading?
Yes.
Ms.
Upgrade, I think
Baker is
the name.
talking about a version upgrade.
There you
Right.
go. Thank you.
Yes, so unfortunately, the version that we are installing is an older version. That probably has a shelf life, and again, when I say a shelf life, that means how long will the vendor, in this case Infor, support that? And we've heard anywhere from 3 to 5 years that will be what's left. So what does that mean practically? That means that as a county, we have to sit back and analyze, what is it going to take 2 years from now to start this process to get to the latest version? Now, in Infor's world, that is really a re-implementation. So it is not going to be simply, in the old days, drop a disk in, let it update, and you're good to go. It's also not going to be like it is today, where you, on your phone, let's say, right, you consume those applications updates very quickly, and it just happens. You don't really even know. Unfortunately, it's not going to be like that. It is going to be as if we were starting an implementation over again. A couple of things are in our advantage. We are now more organized. We have our data clean. We have our processes clean. So a lot of that will ease that transition. But in our research, and even within for themselves, it is a re-implementation.
And am I correct that only some of the modules would have to be upgraded, and that there's some modules that are already in the higher version?
That's correct. There, and I don't know the detail. There's loads of modules out there, Councilman Miller, so that's a great call out. That upgrade plan is something that we will definitely have to analyze and come back. Right now, I'm not in a position to discuss the details of that. But to your point, Councilwoman Baker, is something we have to have on our minds as we celebrate the victory. We have to turn around and quickly come back with what's our plan.
And where are we in that 3 to 5 years? Where are we already 3 years in?
No. Sorry, three to 5 from now.
3 to 5 from now?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for that
Yep,
clarity.
that takes us beyond the 2-year budget cycle that we're currently in. So, yep, we'll be looking forward.
And,
Thank you.
and one more question about that budget module that has to be installed after we go live. I know you're about to say that we might, if we have to, consider that we implement payroll but do WFM in stages. And my question is, if we do that, does the budget module have to wait until WFM is done, or can the budget module be done if payroll is done?
I don't know the answer to that, guy. I don't want to throw it. It's a very fair question. The budget module is not a huge lift in terms of implementation. I will need to look into that, Councilman Miller, as to, hey, where does that fall if there is some delay on WFM pieces? Okay. And I don't know if WFM means the whole, and we have to have it all in for that budget piece to work. Something we have to have as part of our analysis in October.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take back over here. And also just to kind of add on to that budget module, I think that's BFM, if I'm not mistaken. Keep in mind, a lot of the modules have had to do with just business process changes, right? It's taken the businesses quite a bit of time to understand, how does this function? And not only that, but how do we change our internal processes to support the system and make it work, to our betterment? So did it mean any custom configurations? I think regarding BFM, and I'm not, again, I have not worked on that module, but I believe that that could be business intensive. I don't know how many ERP resources would be needed, certainly a project manager, but I think to Andy's point, we could certainly go ahead and get a little bit more understanding of what's left for that, because I think that that's either phase 2 or phase 3 of that module. I don't have the exact, though.
And on the contingency plan that's in front of us now,
Yes.
I'm presuming these are contingency plans, so when you're saying, for example, WFM will not be ready for 12/19 implementation, you're not saying that that's the case yet. These contingencies are for if that turns out to be the case. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Now, again, just being very straight, that, again, we have a lot of issues, right? We've talked about not only the issues that have come out of the parallel, but we've looked at the outstanding tasks that we still need to accomplish as well. A lot of them are WFM-centric. So, yeah, we thought it made perfect sense to go ahead and talk about what that contingency plan would look like. The best thing that could happen is that the WFM team comes to us at the end of October and says, one more test and we're ready to go live, right? That would put a lot of pressure on us to get everybody trained, but without having that crystal ball, I don't want to make that commitment yet. I do want to plan for if that module is not ready. So with that, basically, we would go ahead and we would look at separating those modules out for the purposes of this discussion. We would leave WFM in a state of test and correction, right? They would go ahead and keep working through it, run their parallels. And in the meantime, what we're doing is we're also running a proof of concept right now. And that means, how do we take information out of our current time entry system, right? This thing called SAP. And it's where we keep, the time records now. We are going through and testing that as well. And what that would allow us to do is give us the time we need to give WFM in a good state. Whether that's January, February, March, I don't know. Again, I think we're going to have a real solid idea by the end of this month exactly where that's at. But it would allow us to still go live with payroll, S3 payroll, and process all 8,000 users through that. And that's, again, keep in mind, about 2,000 or 2,500 users already that don't even use WFM. So they would automatically still be going through the new payroll system. So that's the contingency that we're working on. And again, that proof of concept, initial findings are that everything is looking positive, but again, we need to give the team the time to go ahead and prove that out 100%. So any questions about that? Because again, I know that that's probably the first time you're hearing of a contingency plan.
So if I understand that the contingency plan basically involves doing payroll through the new system, but continuing to use the old system for time management until it's ready.
That's exactly correct.
And my question is how much of a problem do you have with interfacing, and is it better to do it that way, or is it just too much more work, and is it better to just delay the whole thing until it's all ready to go?
I don't think delaying it's going to really help. If we can go ahead and prove this out, the interesting thing being, again, historically, we've looked at okay, the teams before us haven't been able to do this. Our initial testing of this proof of concept is successful. So I would not want to go ahead and not entertain that as an opportunity, because the S3 side of payroll is thoroughly getting tested, right? We're going to test it with WFM time records. We're also testing it with the current existing legacy time record system. So if WFM needs a little bit more time, I think that this is absolutely the best route to go, because it allows us to go live and still meet that date with our payroll system, with WFM following short behind. And I don't know, again, exactly what shortly behind means, but We will know that in the next couple to 3 weeks.
And you're talking the last week of October for a decision
Correct.
on whether it's the full plan or the contingency plan, and if it's a contingency plan, what's the timing and the sequencing on the WFM? Is that correct?
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Again,
Thank
they
you.
might come back and say, you know what, we feel really solid, but for example, Sheriff's Department probably has the biggest amount of unique scenarios, I'll call it. So they might say, hey, let's go and do the ones that we are 1,000,000% ready to go with, right? And then we do a phased approach. Again, we don't have that figured out yet, but to me that makes sense. Doesn't make sense really to include risk when we know that there are other, agencies that might be able to fully partake in the full process while we're working on some of the more challenging ones.
Okay, questions? Ms. Baker?
And I'm glad you have a contingency plan. I think that it's worth supporting, that you have a fallback and still able to move forward. I think my only really concern is that, as we talked before, in payroll, doing the legacy system, you have retirees in that. You have people that are waiting to get through their obligation and retire. And if we extend their time and we go another quarter into 2022, hopefully that's all that we're talking about. Are we vulnerable to a few employees that have been, very committed to this project into a legacy program that we're not going to replace them, but we are also very dependent on them staying and following through, so that we don't hear first of the year we're really caught because we don't have the people typically at the end of the years when they retire, we don't have the people to fill the spaces of those that just left. Are you concerned about that at all?
So I think I would like to answer it this way, Councilwoman Baker, and that is for that particular system, because we did talk about the timekeeping as well as the payroll processing end, right? On the timekeeping side, I believe that's less of a risk. I believe that we've got resources that will probably be engaged, and might have interest in potentially taking on some ERP functionality. Again, those are discussions that we still need to have, but I don't think it's a risk that I am concerned about.
You're not worried that the people that we have in place now that are near retirement, coming to the end of the year, are not going to depart, and they have given their service. I mean, we can't fault them for that. But it also leaves us perhaps vulnerable past a time that we thought we would be complete.
Right, and one of those, as a matter of fact, so I have found out that there are 3 that are supporting that legacy system. One of them is not of retirement, I believe is not interested in that, and I believe the other 2 may be, or at least eligible, right? I don't know what their mindset is, but no, that was a great thing to call out. I think it's a very, very small risk that we have.
Good to hear. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And I believe the last slide that I have, if the presentation wants to work, is there's just a view of what we're talking about. Basically, again, taking the existing timekeeping system and processing it through our current payroll or our new payroll system. That means that we could go ahead and we can sunset our current legacy payroll processing system. So that would be an extraordinary win. And again, it would allow us to have that time to go ahead and work through our current new Infor time management system.
If I may? Chair, that's okay. Chair?
Yes. Yes.
Did I see in your meeting of deadlines that the stabilization period ends at the end of October?
So we've had many discussions about that stabilization, right? At first, we didn't even really know what the breadth of that project was going to be. We just knew that There was a lot of money tied up in procurement that we couldn't pay to vendors. We knew that there was a lot of issues in the fiscal processing. So we've gotten to a point now where we feel, based on current progress of that team, that we should be ending that project around the end of October. There's still going to be issues out there, and primarily on the fiscal side, but those are going to just continue over into typical post-production support like we would.
Good to hear.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentations. I believe we learned a lot, and we'll be watching this closely. We'll get a first indication in 2 weeks on the decision on the second parallel, and we hope that that's a good one, and we'll wish you the best of success, and if there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know.
Really appreciate it, Councilman Miller.
Okay, thank you. Is there any miscellaneous business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody, and economic development starts in 5 minutes.